Okay, this is Richard Hsu. Good morning. Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Brian Cuban, who's an author, mental health advocate, former lawyer, also the younger brother of Mark Cuban. Brian, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Brian, I interview a lot of lawyers on this program, and let me start by asking you, what made you decide to go to law school to begin with?
Well, it wasn't to make a lot of money. It wasn't to emulate Atticus Finch. It wasn't to be the next Clarence Darrow. It was because I could stay in school for 3 more years and not have to deal with the mental health issues I was experiencing at that time, which were 2 separate eating disorders, traditional bulimia, binging and purging, as well as exercise bulimia, which is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. And this is as a senior in Penn State going on to law school. And yes, guys do get eating disorders. About 50% or more are male. A lot of people don't know that. And then I was also a alcoholic, a full-blown alcoholic by the time I finished Penn State. And these were issues that I really didn't have any self-awareness about, but I knew that they were things that allowed me to survive day to day in my mind, and that made perfect sense. And I was sitting in the placement office at Penn State. I wanted to be a cop, and that would have worked out well because I'd have been the first guy trading out the blow for the baby laxative, because I was addicted to cocaine too as an adult. But and there were these 2 guys next to me from Pittsburgh talking about going to Pitt Law and taking the LSATs. And I start listening to them, and the bells start going off in my head, and the bells of all the things I just said. And it made perfect sense to me that, okay, since law school is 3 years, I'll go and hide for 3 more years. That's it. That is the only reason I went to law school.
And how are you able to function in law school and take classes and do all this stuff as an alcoholic and a bulimia? I mean, it seems hard to believe that you could do all that.
Well, you'd be surprised, Richard. You'd really be surprised, because a lot of what I do now is I work with law students. They reach out to me and things like that. And I've talked to law students from all around the country, and many, I mean, it's not all the time, but you'd be shocked how many are there for all the wrong reasons. They don't want to be there. Maybe they're first generation and felt pressure to go. Everyone in their family's a lawyer. This reason, that reason. They say, I just don't want to be here. I'm miserable. And so it's not an unheard of thing. Now, my reasons may be unheard of. And I didn't do that well. I mean, I was near the bottom of my class, and I still have reoccurring nightmares about going to accept my diploma, and the dean of the law school pulling it back, going, psych, you didn't graduate. I wake up sweating and grabbing for it. And the irony of that is I was so ashamed of my stint at Pitt that I didn't even bother going to graduation. Just mail it to me. It's all good. But, that actually came back around 2.5 years ago. I was invited to keynote the 2020 Pitt Law commencement as someone who had overcome many obstacles to find their true path in life.
Yeah.
So I got to wear the cap and gown for the first time.
I take it you never practiced as a lawyer then?
I have practiced as a lawyer. I was a claims adjuster first until I passed the bar at the Texas bar, which I failed 3 times as a result of drugs and alcohol. Richard, the first time I took the Texas bar exam, my study aides staying the weekend before out in a roach-infested motel were a fifth of Jack Daniels, 3.5 ounces of cocaine, and a liter of Tab, and bar review books I'd borrowed that weekend. And as you might imagine, I failed. And I would fail it 2 more times before finally passing. And I went on to work as a plaintiff's lawyer, personal injury lawyer, an unethical personal injury lawyer, taking cases I shouldn't take. I was showing up in court under the influence. I was showing up in court hungover. I've done cocaine in the Dallas federal courthouse. I've done cocaine in the Dallas state courthouse. And sometimes I get this shock reaction. Didn't you know you could go to jail? Yes, I wasn't stupid. I was addicted, right? I had substance use disorder. I didn't have stupid disorder. And so, of course, I knew these things, but I couldn't stop.
How old were you when you got addicted to these substances?
Well, alcohol became a problem at Penn State. I was 18. I discovered cocaine at 1987, so at 26. I did my first line of cocaine, and it was Katie bar the door. And, it really revolves around a lot of childhood issues where I was a heavyweight. I was a heavy child, trending towards obese. I was bullied severely in school. I was physically assaulted. There's kind of a half funny story around that. But I was physically assaulted over my weight. And I had a very difficult relationship with my mother that revolved around my weight and food and body image. My mother had a very difficult relationship with her mother, who probably had a difficult relationship with her mother. These kind of things often run downhill.
Yeah. So then how old were you when you actually were able to turn the addiction or become a recovering addict?
I went into recovery Easter weekend 2007, where I kind of hit what we hear as the quote unquote rock bottom. And I kind of cringe at that term, but it's a term people understand because the goal should be to recover at the highest possible point, not when you've wiped out a family or done this or done that on the high, right? Or done something awful or in prison. And I had now my wife and my girlfriend at the time came home, found me passed out in bed. She had gone away for the weekend. I'd had a 2-day blackout and there was cocaine everywhere and alcohol. And she had only moved in with me a short time before, and she knew nothing about my issues. And you might say, well, how could she not know? You would be shocked at how many married lawyers I talk to and other people who've been using cocaine and all these things. Their spouses have no clue. Their children have no clue. We have a JD in law. We have a PhD in camouflaging our behaviors. And eventually that gets harder and harder. And, and then finally the chickens come home to roost. And they came home to roost for me Easter weekend 2007. And so I had to deal with the fact that there was no explanation for other than the truth for this Law and Order episode of orgy of evidence that I might not be the person I represented myself to be for her.
Yeah, right.
So we took my second trip down to a psychiatric facility. And my first trip was after a near suicide attempt in the summer of 2005. Wow. That was when things turned around.
And what's the road to recovery like? I mean, I'm assuming it's not an easy road. I'm sure
it hasn't been an easy road. It hasn't been an easy road. She moved out, but fortunately, she stood by me. Her name's Amanda, and she stood by me, and we dated for over a decade while I rebuilt the broken trust, and while I found recovery, and now we've been together almost 17 years.
Wow.
So not all relationships will work out, when they're fractured by drugs and alcohol and lies, but ours was able to, and a lot of it was me having to do the work for myself and not for her, not for my brothers, not for my parents, who were alive at that time. I had to do it for me because spouses leave, parents pass, trauma happens, pets die, and all those things can be relapses or triggers for relapse. And so my path was 12-step, and the most well-known of the alcohol 12 steps is AA, but there are other 12 steps. And so I sat down for the first day in that 12-step, and there's been a lot of therapy and a lot of reckoning with a lot of my childhood issues. I'm still in therapy to this day. I still struggle with major depression to this day, and I take antidepressants. I find no shame in it, and there shouldn't be any shame.
What about any setbacks in that road to recovery? Did you have any major setbacks? Do you relapse into taking any drugs, or how did that work?
No, I have not had. Prior to it, there were a million micro relapses where I, started into the stages of change where I'm thinking about it. And then all of a sudden I relapse and I'll never do that again. And I string together 2 weeks and I relapse, leading up to the rock bottom. And so there were those kind of relapses. But fortunately, since then, going now on 17 years, I have not had a hard relapse where I've used drugs or used alcohol. Now, I still struggle with major depressive episodes, and I have been suicidal in recovery. My mom passed in February, last February, and I went into an incredible depression. And I called my younger brother and said I was contemplating going to a hotel room and overdosing myself.
Wow.
And fortunately, I have the tools to call my psychiatrist and talk it through, and I worked through that. So depression can and often does exist independently of addiction. They are often co-occurring and coexisting and intertwined, but they often exist independently as two separate things.
Now, as a recovering alcoholic, like for example, you cannot even take like a recreational drink, or can you do
That's a
that? Or
great question, and here's how I look at that. I don't know, and I don't want to know. Right? I
mm,
we talk when you talk about what's in our recovery toolbox. Here is how I look at drinking now. This is my recovery toolbox in full. I look at that drink and say, if I take that drink, what's the upside?
mm,
I'm not I'm not going to bars trying to meet girls and stuff. And, I don't do all those things. I'm 61 years old now.
mm,
What would be the upside of taking this drink
mm,
other than losing my string of recovery,
mm.
and there's none. There is like an investment, right? What's the upside of that investment?
Yeah, yeah.
There's no upside to it. So why make it?
Mm,
There's no point.
mm,
And
mm,
that's the way I look at it.
mm.
How
So
is my life going to be any better after that? It
yeah,
won't.
yeah, yeah. So now you spend a lot of time working with recovering drug addicts and alcoholics. Is that
Yes,
one of the things you do a lot of?
I love it. Yes, that's what I do. I do quite a bit. Over the years, I wrote a book called The Addicted Lawyer that became very well known in the legal profession,
Mm,
law schools and law firms. So I work with people. People email me, and I just work with them. I mean,
mhm,
like almost like a pseudo sponsor. People. I don't charge people to do those things. They just email me with their problems, and I give them the benefit of my experience
mm, mm.
because that's all I have. Right? I'm not an expert. I'm not a doctor. I'm
Yeah,
not an expert in anything but my lived experience.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I give them the benefit of that, and they can take what they want from that or take nothing from it at all.
Mhm,
But I
mhm,
also speak at law firms, and I spoke at the Florida Bar Conference recently, and I'll do things like that.
mm,
But yeah, I'll give anyone the experience benefit of my experience, strength, and hope.
mhm. Well, tell me about this recent fiction book you wrote. What kind of possessed you to do that? What was the inspiration to do that?
Yeah, it's called The Ambulance Chaser, and the inspiration was a very dark dream, reoccurring dream that I had that kind of focused in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
I uh, I was having this dream about being with my childhood friend, and we're throwing bodies into this giant bonfire, just
Okay.
throwing these dead bodies into this giant bonfire. And these bodies are burning, but the eyes are open, and there are these 8-ball cracked eyes, and they're staring back at me. And all of a sudden, the dream fast forwards to adulthood. And I would wake up disoriented, thinking, did I murder somebody? Why haven't I been arrested?
Huh.
And so it transitions from childhood to adulthood, where I'm worried about these crimes that were committed as a child.
Huh.
And that was the genesis of The Ambulance Chaser, a Pittsburgh personal injury lawyer accused of the murder of a one-time childhood classmate 30 years prior. And he's arrested for it and has to go on the run to find the one person who can prove his innocence.
Huh. And how was it like writing? I mean, writing fiction is not easy. How was that? What was that like?
It was a process because it's very different than writing memoir style. Because
Yeah.
I'm an expert in my story. You
Yeah,
have to learn
right.
stylistic things and how to use dialogue and all the things every writer has to know.
Mm,
But to write fiction, you're creating from the ground up, and you have to create fun characters, believable characters, because there are no new plots, right? There are no new plots. There may be, some will say there are 8 or 9 plots in the world. Some might say 16, depending on what your school of thought is. But everything has been done.
mm,
All there is are unique and fun characters and an interesting situation,
mm,
and some twist, and you make them believable. So that's the challenge, and it was a challenge. It took me over 2 years to write The Ambulance Chaser because I started writing it, and I have a mentor out in California. Her name's Bonnie Hearn Hill, and she's a very acclaimed novelist. And we would go back and forth, and she was honest with me. She'd say, "Brian, this sucks. I know you're trying, but this is awful." And so had to learn how to think like a fiction writer, and that was a very different style of thought,
yeah,
of
right.
thinking, of analysis of a book, of creating a story than as a memoir writer.
Yeah, right.
It was hard.
So, and what's the reception been? Has it been good? People like it?
It was great. Yeah, it's been good. I mean, it's not a New York Times bestseller, but it opened up as the number one when it was released a year ago, December 7th. It was the number one debut fiction from debut author fiction book, fiction thriller.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, and that was a lot of that too. That's a whole nother conversation about how hard it is to be an author, right?
Yeah,
They
right.
don't care what your last name is, especially fiction. They don't care what your last name is. They don't even care so much if you have a platform, unless you're Mark Cuban or somebody where they know you can push it out to you have a million-person list, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They don't care about that either. They want they want to know that it's a good story and that they can sell 10,000 books.
Yeah, right.
And because nobody wants to take a chance on an unknown, so you just put it out there and you have to do your own marketing. And I think I've done well
Yeah,
in
yeah,
doing that. And
yeah.
I think the book has done well.
Huh. Are you thinking about a sequel or another book?
Yeah,
uh-huh.
I am already working on it. It is
Huh.
called The Body Broker. It is a sequel. And the protagonist, Jason Feldman, gets himself involved with a treatment center that is unscrupulous, and they allegedly possibly murder his girlfriend
Huh. Wow, interesting.
as she was trying to expose some of their practices.
Hmm. So do you think you kind of have I mean, as you said, writing fiction, nonfiction is very different. Do you think you kind
Yes.
of have a knack for writing fiction, or what do you think?
I don't know if I'd call it a knack. I think I'd call it it's something that brings me joy.
Yeah.
Now, it's something that brings me joy combined with fear, right? Okay, you're right. What else do I have to say? With memoir, I know what I have to say because your life is linear,
Yeah.
and about you can do flashbacks and stuff. But with fiction, you can get locked in fear. Okay, even though you've done it, I'll pick it up again tomorrow. I'll pick it up again tomorrow, right? And all of a sudden, months have passed and you haven't written a word.
Yeah.
And this is a common ailment with fiction lawyers. It's just like not just me. Stephen King's gone through it. I'm sure John Grisham's gone through it. Don Winslow. But it's you can fear yourself out of writing every day.
Yeah. When you kind of look back at your life and how it's, kind of evolved, like if you had to pick like one or two like key inflection points, what would you say they would be?
Oh, without a doubt, it would have been my physical assault as a freshman in high school. And I call it the day of the gold pants.
Hmm.
My brother Mark had given me a pair of shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. Mark actually, this was 1976, Saturday Night Fever. The disco era was going into full spin.
Yeah.
Mark taught disco, believe it or not. I bet he didn't tell you that, did it? He taught in downtown Pittsburgh. And he was always coming home with, the flower bell-bottoms and the platform shoes and all these different things.
Huh.
And I guess he got some new clothes, so he gave me a pair of these disco pants. They were satin gold bell-bottom. Huh. Your face could be a mirror looking in them. But Mark wasn't a big guy. I was trending on obese. Uh-huh. I had to jump up and down. I had to spray the water bottle. My butt looked like 15 cats trying to get out when I put those pants on, but I didn't care because I love Mark. It's a sign of his love for me, and I was going to wear those pants to school every day. Uh-huh. And I did, and the kids made fun of me because my stomach hung over them, and they would taunt me and insult me. Cuban, you need to go to Sears and get a bra for your man boobs. Cuban, you need to let out the belt a few inches. And I developed a very self-deprecating sense of humor as a kind of Star Trek deflector shield against these taunts, so they wouldn't know how much it hurt me. But it did hurt. Because in my mind, this is before the internet. In my mind, these were the good-looking kids, the prom king, the prom queen, the kids getting invited to the after-school football games and the house parties, the kids who were walking hand in hand with their girlfriend and boyfriends down the hallway between the lockers with their first kiss. All the things that I associated with love and acceptance, and I wanted it so badly. So I thought if I hung around with these bullies, kind of just on the outside, right, just fringing on the outside, one day it would be like a fraternity hazing, and one would put his arm around me and say, "Cubes, you're one of us now." But that's not how bullying works. I'm wearing my shiny gold disco pants, walking home from school with this group of kids. It's a mile walk to my house. They start making fun of them, and all of a sudden one pulls at the zipper, and it rips a little bit. Another kid goes, "Ooh," and he pulls, and it rips some more. And before you know it, they are on me like a pack of rabid dogs. They tore off my pants, ripped them into shreds down to my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities. I had back in the day, my 3-ring tube socks, my Keds tennis shoes, and I had a Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirt on. They threw them out in the street, walked down the sidewalk high-fiving. like they had done the funniest thing ever.
Hmm.
I walk out in the street, I gather up the shreds, I cover up my Fruit of the Looms, and I waddle home. Cars buzzing by, woo, woo, people looking, but people gawk, no one stopped. The worst part was when I hit an intersection, right? Because I had to stop and wait for the light. And people were looking at me, but no one rolled down their window or said a word. I finally made it home, and the house was quiet. There was no one home. And I walked down to our basement, and it was these old wooden stairs, a house we just sold a few months ago after my mom passed. And the stairs creaked. With every creak of the stairs, I felt like it vibrated out of the house to where my father was operating his trim shops, where they put on convertible tops and reupholstered seats, where my mother was selling real estate, where my brothers were doing whatever they do. And it reverberated out to the school where everyone was going to know what happened. Back in those days, going viral meant 15 kids in the lunchroom knew about it, right? When they passed notes. And I found a wastebasket, and I buried those shreds. I pushed aside the newspapers, pushed aside the cans, and buried those shreds, hoping to bury my shame, and I would never think about it again. But that's not how trauma works. Trauma remembers, trauma threads, the body keeps the score, and trauma has a way of coming out when we least expect it, when we least expect it, at times when we least expect it. And it was that trauma that really kind of set the tone for how I saw my reflection in the mirror. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw, or a car window or a mall window, I saw a fat pig who needed a bra, who wasn't worthy of any love by anyone. Not his mother, who loved me dearly. She loved me dearly and was having her own mental health issues at a time when women couldn't talk about those things, because she struggled mightily with her mother. They had a very verbally abusive relationship back and forth. And that kind of vision of myself is what would, at least under the surface, either on the surface or under the surface, impact my life for decades.
When you reflect on your life now, I mean, are you grateful, amazed that you're at where you're at? I mean, given what you went through and how it could have ended,
Oh,
pretty
absolutely.
early. Aren't you just amazed?
Absolutely. You have to remember, in the summer of 2005, my brothers came into my house at the urging of a friend, and I had a .45 automatic on my nightstand. And there were drugs spread out everywhere. My first of trips to the psychiatric facility. I might not be here today if not for them. They saved my life. And I look back, and I get asked often, do I wish things were different in the cumulative path that brought me to this place? I don't see any point. I call that revisionist recovery. I don't see any point to that, because it created the Brian that sits here today talking to you. It created the Brian that has played a part, hopefully, I hope I have, in changing lives. It created the Brian who, instead of doing something he just was miserable at, we have in the Jewish religion, we have a saying called Tikkun Olam. It means changing the world with acts of kindness. And it has created a Brian that has taken that path.
Well, Brian, this has been just a wonderful and inspirational conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with you. It's so great to hear your story. And when your new book comes out, please come back and tell me about it.
I absolutely will. And I am so honored to follow my brother on your show. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll have to let him know. This is Richard Hsu and Brian Cuban. Thanks.